Welcome, everybody, to another edition of the Sustainable Community Life podcast. It is my pleasure to be here with Liz Walker. Liz, welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Great to
And
be here.
great for me to be here and an honor to be with you. And we're actually coming to you from the Ecovillage at Ithaca. And I'm so excited that we didn't have to do this by Zoom. And we're actually in one of the first houses with the co-founder of the whole place. So this is really a special moment for me. And maybe it'd be great, just because you answered this question maybe 17 or 1800 times, to share the big picture of the founding and the history of the Ecovillage.
So we started Ecovillage at Ethica back in 1991, and it was the brainchild of my friend Joan Bouquier. Joan and I had coordinated a walk across the United States in 1990, and it was during that walk that she started thinking about what would it be like to create an eco-village that embodied the kinds of messages that we were trying to promote on this walk for the earth, for the environment back in 1990. I got very inspired, as did a lot of other people, with her vision, and I moved to Ithaca in fall of 91 to help co-found this place. It's been an amazing journey. It's now 33 years later. And I think that part of what has led to a pretty successful run here in this community is having a very big vision, having a lot of openness to people bringing their own skills, their own talents, their own backgrounds and experience, and promoting shared leadership so that many different people can put their hands to the wheel and move the project forward. So we have 175 acres here. Most of it has been conserved for agriculture and for natural areas. So we have about 90% of the site has been conserved for that. We have 4 organic farms right now. One is a teaching farm, particularly for low-income people and people of color and immigrants. We have one farm, which is our oldest farm. It's only 10 acres, but it feeds about 1,000 people a week during the growing season, and it's primarily vegetable and some fruit.
It feeds a lot of people here in the Ecovillage, as well as people outside of it.
That's right. Yeah. So that has been highly successful. We also have a dedicated berry farm, and that has recently transitioned, working now with New Roots Charter School, which is a public high school, alternative high school that was founded by one of our Ecovillage residents. The school itself is downtown and is very diverse. And now they have taken over management of the berry field. And so it's still a berry CSA, but also there's a whole educational component for the students. And then we have a regenerative agriculture. We also have 3 co-housing neighborhoods. They're each distinct. They have their own personalities to a certain extent, and they were built at different times using the greenest technologies that we knew of at the time. And together, all of us residents in the 100 households that are here form a village. And so we also own some land as a village, although each neighborhood has its own land and its own governance. And then together we form the village. And then we also have a nonprofit that manages the land that the farms are on and the conservation easement land, the natural areas, and the infrastructure like roads and water and sewer. So it's quite a lot. Oh, and I haven't even mentioned the educational part of it, which is near and dear to my heart. The whole reason we started this Ecovillage from the beginning was to be a grand experiment and really try to figure out what works and what doesn't work in living more lightly on the planet, more harmoniously with each other and with the natural world. And so a key part of that really is not only figuring it out on a constantly changing landscape of people and flora and fauna here, but also to share that with the broader world.
Mm.
So we happen to have our educational program started and continues as a project, the Center for Transformative Action, which is a nonprofit based at Cornell University. And the mission of CTA is really to build partnerships between Cornell students and faculty and staff and the broader community.
Mm.
And so we have a little foothold at Cornell, which is helpful. We also do things with a lot of other colleges and universities around the country. And over these last 33 years, we've had interns from, maybe 10 different colleges. We ran an experimental gap program for a little while. Stuff when I retired, also when the pandemic hit. We have worked with sometimes elementary school kids. There's
Mm.
also various really fun programs that different people run here at the Ecovillage, including One Fire, which is a small business that is run by one of our residents who's an outdoor educator and who works with both children and adults to teach them natural history, things like how to build shelter in the woods so that you can camp out overnight with no matches, no sleeping bag, no tent. And
Wow.
the kids learn how to do these things. They learn how to make fire, rubbing sticks together and stuff like that.
Thank you.
And
I know we could talk a lot more about the history, and I am really enjoying reading your book, by the way. And one thing in your book that really stood out to me was a quote about the village that was something to the effect that you were a culture of sustainability through the love you offer to each other. And the first part seemed, okay, I got that part, because sustainability is written in the DNA
Mhm.
of the Eco-Village. But when I read the part about through the love we offer each other, I wonder if you could share what the social, cultural aspects of living sustainably and the design have created, and why that word love is in the quote.
Yes. So that quote, I would, when you mentioned it to me, I went back to my book and I looked it up, and it was actually a quote from a friend who had come on a tour of the Eco Village.
Mm.
And I believe what she said was, what you're doing here is really unique. You're creating a culture of sustainability through the love that you offer each other.
Mm.
So this was someone who doesn't even live here was saying that.
Mm.
And I think she reflected it pretty accurately.
Mm.
I think that what we are co-creating here, and it's always in process and it's never perfect,
Mm.
but it is a culture of how we belong to a kind of extended family. That's
Mm.
really what I see community as being.
Mm.
So it may be that there's somebody in the community that you don't really get along with, and it might be similar to having that great uncle that you never really clicked with at Thanksgiving, but that's okay. He's
Mm.
still part of the community.
Mm.
He's still part of
Mm.
that extended family belonging. And so what we try to offer here, and again, I'll just say we're imperfect, but we try to really get to know each other on a deeper level
Mm.
and help each other to grow,
Mm.
to be creative, to problem solve together, to work together, to play together.
Mm.
It's it's a pretty remarkable way of living one's life. I have to
Mm.
say, I love it.
Yeah, I
And
feel that you do. Yes. I want to
Yeah.
build on that for a second because I've been doing this tour, and one of the reasons I made the decision to spend more time in every village I go to is because I wanted to get past the fact
Hmm.
and get into the
Yeah.
sense making.
Yeah.
And about a week ago, about a weekend, I started to feel, this is going to sound a little woo woo. So for many of my listeners, you won't be surprised, but I started to feel the heart of the community, not the beautiful land. And by the way, anybody who wants to see what looks to me to be an idyllic place to live, just from a natural beauty perspective, all you got to do is just hang out here for a couple hours and walk. I've gone on the most amazing walks, and I don't think I left the property at any time. Maybe at a couple of times I was at a neighbor's property because you have some neighboring, but there is clearly a land energy here that you've
Yeah.
nurtured, and I can feel the land. I can feel that the land has been cared for. I can feel that the land has a sacredness to it, but I also can feel a heart,
Mhm.
and the heart feels much more of the collective of all the people. And I
Mhm.
wonder if you have a similar experience, like where if you're sensate in that regard, where you or others have said the heart of the Ithaca Eco Village is quite beautiful. And I just wonder, how does that land in you?
I'm so glad that you're talking about this. It isn't something that people usually talk about, but yes, I feel it for sure.
Mm,
What you're saying reminds me of when we invited a Mohawk elder
mm,
to come and help us dedicate the land before we broke ground on the third neighborhood.
mm,
So his name is Tom Porter, and some of our residents at that time were dear friends with him.
mm,
And he was trying to basically revive a Mohawk community up north of here. And Tom came onto our land and he said, when I even drove up Rachel Carson Way, he said, I felt the warmth. It was like going into the ocean and just hitting a warm spot and being surrounded by warmth.
mm,
And he felt that sensation very much. And he said it gave him the desire and the permission to share with us very beautiful Thanksgiving address, which is what the Iroquois or Haudenosaunee people, the five nations who are indigenous to the land in this area, what they do at the beginning of every ceremony
mm,
is go through the Thanksgiving address, which is essentially, it's all about gratitude and it's thanking the air and the water and thunder beings and the all the animals and the birds, and it's extraordinary. And I don't always walk around feeling this, but when in my best moments, I do feel very much that there's some lineage here to that way of being in the world
mm,
and treating the land and treating each other.
mm,
And I do think that there's tremendous amount to learn from the people who are indigenous to this area. And even though there was a concerted genocidal attempt by multiple generations of white people, white settlers, and the U.S. government itself, the Haudenosaunee are still here.
yeah. Yeah, I was just, I'm so moved by the gesture because I also read in your book about that genocide that took place, and it you didn't give you had a lot of focus because it wasn't your book wasn't about what preceded it, but I appreciated you both recognizing that slaughter and the fact that this land was traumatized, as were the people who were wiped out. So bringing an elder of the was the elder also of the Iroquois?
So the Mohawk Nation is one of the Iroquois
Oh, it
nations,
is.
and Haudenosaunee is an indigenous word for Iroquois.
Oh, got it. Thank you. And so I've just
And
really moved that you did
yeah.
that. You actually brought someone who was a
Mhm.
descendant of the ancestors who were killed to come and honor what you were building. And that moves me. So building on this idea, because I'm really into this notion of collective energy,
Mhm.
I've been really blessed over the last few years to study with a teacher who's introduced me to the idea of coherent fields. So a group of people come together and have a similar sense of why they're there and are really open-hearted and open-minded to allowing what wants to emerge from the field to emerge. And then a coherent field is a more conscious field.
Mhm.
And anybody who's been to a workshop, or I'm
Mhm.
sure even your description of the workshops you held in the founding,
Mhm.
you can relate to the feeling. You even wrote about it, what it felt like when the energy lifted and
Mhm.
when something happened and all of a sudden it was like clicked,
Yeah.
and it wasn't just a cognitive progression,
Yeah.
but an energetic. So I wonder what aspects of the Eco Village do you experience as being coherent, and which aspects do you feel are, let's say, needing more support or love
Mhm.
or
Mhm.
consciousness in order to increase their coherence without saying that the village should be a certain way because it is a collective and therefore
Mhm. Mhm.
my view of how it should be is just my view.
Mhm.
I
Mhm.
can't speak
Yeah.
for Eco Village gets a B here and an A here because
Yeah.
someone else might give it a C or a A plus.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
Sure.
from your own perspective as an elder founder,
Mhm.
where do you see coherence in the village and where do you see something that's not quite coherent? And then I'd like to share my perspective on that too.
Sure. There are ways in which we strive for values in our community, living by certain values. So
Mm,
there are many layers of the values. There are social layers, there are environmental or ecological layers, there are economic layers, there are educational layers, there are spiritual layers, although we don't tend to talk about that so much. And then there are ways that those come together
mm,
and overlap. So it's quite complex.
mhm,
And in addition to that, we have about 220 residents
mm,
of all ages. They're from babies to people in their 90s. They come from different countries, different backgrounds. Some people are quite wealthy here, very many, but a few, there are a number of people who are really struggling to get by. So different economic backgrounds, different work backgrounds. When I hear you talk about coherence, what I guess I think about are transcendent moments. I don't know if that's
mm.
the same as what you mean, but there's certainly times when we come together as a community that there's that sense of just, wow, isn't this great?
What did we
You
do?
know,
Look what we did.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, or not even look what we did, but this is just the way to live. You know,
Mm,
this is feeling pretty good right now. Where I personally feel that is, I feel that when someone is really struggling in community
mm,
for whatever reason. So there are times when people have really severe issues, whether it's a divorce or whether somebody dies or somebody has a really severe illness. And when people are going through those kinds of crises,
mm,
we tend to be pretty good as a community
mm,
in banding together and figuring out how
mm.
we can make a difference.
I've heard many stories of that. It's very inspiring.
Yeah,
That's transcendence.
yeah, it really
That's like
is.
going several steps outside of the conventional. Oh,
Yeah,
poor Bob, poor Mary,
yeah,
having a hard time. Not much
yeah,
I can do. Whereas you guys, you don't do that.
yeah,
You maybe even go past the point of your own comfort
yes, yeah,
and give up your own privileges so that those individuals can find their way above the water.
yeah, yeah.
And that's amazing. What's interesting, I thank you also for attending the talk that we did together on the experience of visiting other
Hmm.
communities. And I forget the name of the gentleman, but one of the gentlemen, when I asked the question about some aspect of connection,
Hmm.
lack thereof and where it's really obvious. He said, you know, the time that I felt the most connection and the most sense of community is when we were building. You remember that comment?
Yes, I think it was a woman who made that.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I
Okay.
think so.
Okay.
Yes, I do remember that because it was striking to me
Mm,
and been what we call a burning soul. I've been a key person getting each of the 3 neighborhoods up and running, and each of them has had tremendous challenges. I kept thinking, "Oh, we've done this before. It's gonna be so much easier the next time." No, every time something new comes up.
amazing.
But what I have noticed is that the people who were involved in the founding of each neighborhood, so each neighborhood has between 30 and 40 homes. So each of the families that were involved at the beginning in founding the neighborhood, those are the people who tend to stick around for a while.
Mm,
And then we've had openings over time because the US has a very mobile population. I think we have a certain amount of flow through here.
mm,
And flow through happens to be more people who did not put their finances, their marriage, their livelihood, everything on the line in order
mm,
to create one of these neighborhoods.
amazing.
And so it's really people are less invested if they come
Mm,
in later. And the ironic thing to me is that some of those people who did not have the experience creating a neighborhood from scratch felt that they were really missing something. We had people from Frog jump the ravine, as we call it. There's a little stream, intermittent stream between Frog and Song. And so some people jumped the ravine and went to Song to help found that neighborhood because they felt
mm,
they missed out.
so
And
interesting.
and some people from Song
Mm,
helped to found Tree because they felt they had missed out.
yeah,
And all the while I'm thinking, "Oh my god, it's so much work to create a neighborhood. Why would you put yourself through that?"
but they did.
But they did, and
Amazing.
I think in many cases, people felt very fulfilled by it. They also felt very frustrated, and it took years of their lives to help
Mm,
create a neighborhood, but they felt engaged in something that was bigger than them,
mm,
and
mm,
it is quite a heady experience to have a really big vision and then figure out how to make it happen,
mm.
and that's something that I think people here excel at.
It's
And
interesting. Well, I have a visualization of this as being having been here for a little while of a steep climb and then reach a plateau,
mhm,
and then neighborhood 2, steep climb, reach a plateau.
mhm,
Neighborhood 3, steep climb. And in each case, correct me if I'm wrong, there was a amount of time between the solidification of the first neighborhood
mm,
and the building of the second, and then not so much work,
mhm,
more living rather than
mhm.
building. So build, live, build, live. Am I oversimplifying?
Yes, and it's really I sometimes compare living in community to being thrown into a cauldron of personal growth
Mm,
because anything that is not really worked through in your personality
mm,
is gonna get worked over. There's another analogy I often use is that we're like stones in a fast moving stream. And at the beginning, the stones are really sharp and they bounce up against each other and it hurts because they have sharp edges. And
mm, mm.
that's the conflicts that happen between people.
Yeah.
And then after you've lived in community for a while, those sharp edges start rounding off.
Mm,
You have to take responsibility, though,
mm,
for doing your own polishing, your own rounding off, and noticing, "Oh, I really got triggered by something he said," and that reminded me of something that happened to me as a five-year-old child, and I need to do some emotional work on that and some
mm,
processing and figure out maybe through journaling or talking to a therapist, what is that about? And I need to go and talk to that person
Mm-hmm.
and tell them, just, I couldn't really listen to you because I had this emotional reaction that was based on this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And now I've worked through it, and now I can listen to you and I want to hear what you have to say.
Right. Yeah.
So there's that kind of intensive relationship building, which
Mm-hmm.
I think in our society, many people never get to that stage of
Right.
conscious communication in their lives.
Yeah.
But when you live in community, you're in an environment that promote, let's say, constant growth.
Mm.
We have another expression, which is, we call moments like that an AFOG, and it stands for another fucking opportunity for growth.
Yeah. Is that related to the idea that not everybody is into it, but it's a necessary skill to develop?
Yeah, yeah, it's hard. It is
Mm.
never easy.
Mm.
I think no matter how much conflict resolution training you have, or nonviolent communication, or any of these other skill sets,
Mm-hmm.
it's still hard.
Mm.
It's not easy to sit with your own discomfort of being in conflict.
Mm.
It's not easy to communicate with somebody else that
Mm.
has a conflict with you. But I know for myself, and I think this is often true for others, that if you don't deal with the conflict, it feels much worse.
Yeah.
And it's like walking through the fire, to go to what feels uncomfortable and actually work on it with another person.
Mm.
And what we find often happens is, if people take that necessary step, that leads to much closer relationships.
Mm.
I've had the experience where I felt so mad at somebody, I didn't even want to talk to them. I just wanted to walk the other direction when they came towards me, that sort of intense fight or flight reaction. And then when I made the time and they made the time to sit down and talk for an hour and a half, we're both able to learn so much about
Mm.
each other and where we're coming from.
Mm.
And I have had experiences where I felt really close to those people afterwards,
Mm.
because it's a level of intimacy that I think we all long for in our lives.
Mm.
And it's really getting to know each other. It's going way beyond the superficial
Mm-hmm.
and really delving down into a level of self-awareness and other awareness that I think is how ideally we would all live on the planet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think this is another one of those conversations that we could spend a lot of time on.
Yeah.
And I want to go a little further and talk about something that I observe, and this is not unique to
Mhm.
Ithaca, but I observe that in general, when comfort is available and we can meet our needs through any of the various gadgets and distractions that we have, computers, televisions, our cell phones, social media, that it can often lead to avoiding connection,
Mhm.
because connection can sometimes be, like you said, if I know I have some sharp edges and I'm really not wanting to rub too much,
Mhm.
I just stay at my house. And what I observe is that the nicer the village is in terms of accoutrement, and the bigger the houses are and the more comforts there are, the tendency for less, what I'll call like intentional connection.
Mhm.
We always have unintentional connection, because when you build a co-housing community, it's designed for you to run into people on the way to name 10
Yeah.
things: laundry,
Yeah.
car, meals, compost, garbage, playing with kids,
Office space.
100%
Yeah.
common room,
Yeah.
this and that.
Yeah.
And so I wonder how you feel about that. Like, do you feel that in some instances we've built a community that's quite comfortable? Because I have to say that even though the houses are small, they're really nice. You built
Mhm.
some really nice homes,
Oh, thank
not in violation of your ethical
Mhm.
approach to conservation and
Mhm.
ecology. Actually, the opposite. You made choices that perhaps took away a little bit of maybe bigger in the effort to create more contained ecological footprint. But I wonder to what extent you feel that some people hang out inside because, I don't want to rub stones.
Yes, I think that does happen for sure. I think that we have a broad range of people who live in this community, a lot of different personality types.
Mm,
We have some people who are far more extroverted and get their juice from hanging out with other people. We have people who would be happy to never see another person around and just walk the land and not have so much interaction, and they might feel even threatened by too many visitors or a group of students walking through or
mm,
whatever. It really ranges. I do think that growing up in the United States, we already have some things stacked against us in terms of being more automatically communitarian.
mhm,
Like, I've lived in different countries. I lived in Peru for 2 years, England for a year. I traveled widely. I've lived for weeks at a time in Senegal and Norway and Canada and various other places. And I think that in many cultures, there's more of a sense of tradition in reaching out and being part of, say, an extended family community, or also in agrarian areas like Italy. The traditions are hundreds of years deep
mhm,
about getting together and doing things. Here, it's as if we need to reinvent those traditions.
mm,
And so we consciously are doing that. And my
mhm,
husband, Jared, is one of the key people who is behind a committee called Community Life. And their whole purpose is to create fun events that bring people together.
mm,
They're often seasonal celebrations, musical celebrations, they're celebrations of people's creativity. Some of my favorites that in we call them invented celebrations. Some of my favorites are what started out as guys baking pies, and now it has another name. And here's Jared now. We're just talking about community celebrations.
That's right.
Come show
Say
your
hi to
face.
everybody.
Yeah.
Hello, everybody.
So that was Jared, my husband, and he has coordinated this committee, which is called Community Life. And Guys Baking Pies, which is now called Guys Baking Pies and Beyond to include people of different genders, is a celebration every August in which people go out on the land and pick blackberries, because there's so many blackberries around here, wild blackberries, and they might pick other berries over at Kestrel Perch, our berry farm, and they make pies. And that's they make them together or they make them in their own home. And then we have a community wide celebration. And in recent years, since the pandemic, we've done it outdoors whenever the weather allows. And it's a beautiful thing. And people invite
Mm,
friends and family members from town. And often we have as many as 25 pies. And then we have ice cream and rice stream, and people share poems and songs. And it's really a fun thing.
mm,
So that's just one example of a fun seasonal activity that was basically invented because Jared and a buddy went out blackberry picking 30 years ago, and they had gallons of blackberries and they didn't know what to do with them.
mm.
And so Jared's friend said, let's bake some pies. And that if you have pies, you need people to eat them.
Yeah. 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 I think that you're a reflection of the single family home phenomenon in the suburbs, which has predominated the US scene for quite some time, and how that, in addition to the absence of hundreds of years of ceremony and history, has led to this very individual,
Mhm.
me on my own. I don't really feel part of anything else. Me and my family operate in this single family home nightmare. And the Ecovillage just seems perfectly designed to say, no, wait a minute. Like you said, there might be, let's experiment. We've got 30 years of experience, but we're keen to there might be a better way. We could maybe use a quarter of the energy. We could maybe have less loneliness, less isolation, more connection, and have a place where people might want to come and, wow, what could we learn? I have a few more important questions that I wanted to ask you that relate to some of my own journey. So I think I mentioned to you that I'm working on a project with the Federation for Intentional Community, which is all about the idea of increasing the economic self-sufficiency of intentional communities so that people don't need to drive to a job, so that there could be jobs created within the community, so that perhaps we could have more equity, inclusion, and lower income people could do well. And I wonder, you used a word when we were walking around of extreme local. And you were talking about like extreme local is the apple on the tree right outside your door, or the pepper that you grew in your own garden. And even extreme local is I walk to the farm and pick up my CSA. I wonder if that extreme local idea could be applied to other elements. Like I noticed in your founding goals, you had a word that I love called ecopreneurship and these cottage industries. And you have some of these, but I wonder to what extent that might create more of this sense of we work together, we live together, we support each other, and therefore our stones are going to get smoother. What do you think of that from an economics perspective?
So I can just say that from the very beginning, our vision was to have a lot of livelihoods up here. And I think, I don't know, I haven't totted the number of people who work on site recently, but I would say probably of the working adults here, probably 50% work on site. A lot of them are remote workers.
So more than the 23 livelihoods, more than the 23 livelihoods that you list on the website.
Probably, yeah. We have, of course, our farmers. Not all of them live on site, but a lot of them do. So there's something like 15 part-time to full-time jobs associated with the farms. We have our educational nonprofit right now. That's one. I don't even think she's working full-time, but in the past we've had up to 3 part-time people working, maybe even more than that, because when I was running it, I used to employ a lot of people just on a consulting basis. We also have many people who are able to work for various companies all over the country and do remote work. We now have high-speed internet. We made a choice to do the underground cable. We were one of the first places in the country to do that, so that people would be able to work from home or work from the common houses. We have therapists who work out of the common houses. We have computer programmers and various computer professionals. We have writers. We have so many different kinds of skilled workers, massage therapists. We have house cleaners. We have childcare workers. We have outdoor education specialists. So these are some of the ways that different people here make a living, and then a number of us are retired. So it's surprising how many people actually are on site at any given time. And even people with regular jobs as often work remotely, if they have special arrangements with their employers. So we already have all of that in place. I think we could greatly augment it through a number of factors. I no longer have the energy to do this, to be the spark plug, the burning soul to get this done. But my dream has always been to have an education center that also doubles as a visitor center for more casual visitors.
People who can stay without making all the arrangements to.
That would be great. And also interns. we need to grow in the way that you talked about before of the step up
Yeah.
with each neighborhood, ideally, in my view, and this is my view only, not everybody in the village agrees with this at all, but it'd be wonderful to have an educational center that also is a visitor center and also could house village-wide events.
Beautiful.
And that could also have a cafe that, say, features local foods from our farms, and that
Mm,
maybe some of the staff could be provided by our own teams who have a part-time paying job, and
mm,
they could collaborate with our local colleges and university. There's a hotel school, there's hospitality school at Cornell.
mm,
They could have some of their students work on a business plan and helping to set that kind of really inviting, welcoming place.
mm,
We could have big contra dances there. Jared and I are big contra dancers, and we're always looking for venues. So
mm,
having a big open space that could double as a performance space with a stage at one end and having some more office spaces for people. There are a lot of people here who would like office spaces and they're not enough to
mm,
rent. And also having some craft areas, and there are people who would love to have a dedicated spiritual meditation space.
mm,
We also have professional musicians who live here, and in the past, we've had a concert series that's open to
mm,
people in Ithaca to come up, as well as people here. And we've had visiting musicians and visiting storytellers, and we are pretty well known nationally and internationally in community circles and eco-village
mhm,
circles. Many people would love to come and study here, but we don't really have the space to put up visitors. So
mm,
something that we've been aware lacking
mm.
for literally decades is adequate visitor housing.
Yeah.
It'd be wonderful to have some tent platforms for people who can just afford to camp.
Mhm,
It would be wonderful to have more B&Bs. We do have some, but not a lot. It would be great to have some dormitory space
mm,
to house students. So this is a big vision. I don't know if it will happen or not.
mm,
I think just as there was pushback for each of the neighborhoods, we got pretty severe pushback from a few neighbors who border our land when we wanted to build the first neighborhood.
mhm.
Then once we had the first neighborhood built, there were people who hated the idea of a second neighborhood. But because that was part of the big vision that we started with, they were finally persuaded that it's okay to build a second
Mhm.
neighborhood. Then when we wanted to build a third neighborhood, all hell broke loose because there were people in two neighborhoods
You
that
said
were
no.
already very happy with the size we are. Thank you very much. And we don't want any more people here.
Mhm,
But we did build a third neighborhood, and it created some conflict. I think most of that conflict has been worked through,
mm,
although there's probably still some residual feelings there.
sure.
And same with building anything else on this land. There's so much that all of us value about what we already have that
Mhm,
it feels very scary to some people to up the ante a little bit more.
yeah. One thing that just building on this, by the way, I have a
Mhm.
lot of passion for what you're talking about because
Mhm.
it feels like it's a unifying aspirational dream
Mhm.
that overcomes a lot of challenges that are intrinsic, and a few of the ones you mentioned, but a couple of the digital ones, like when you look at other eco-villages, they have a very significant revenue and employment coming from their educational centers. If you go click on Earth Haven, which is down in North
Mhm.
Carolina, and you look at their page for their educational faculty, they have like maybe
Mhm.
12 or 13 people
Mhm.
on faculty. They
Mhm.
all live in the village and they're all telling the story of the village
Yeah.
to the people, and they have facilities for people to come. And so if you had that, not only would you be able to fulfill the dream of sharing the vision and the
Mhm.
beauty, but you'd also have employment opportunities for people who wanted to step up, because you have some amazing sustainability people who have decades of
Mhm.
experience with how to create restorative agriculture, restorative farm, restorative lands, how to get rid of invasive species, how to plant like nature wants them to grow. And I learned this just from one gardening and landscaping so, and that's,
Yeah.
and I
Yeah.
probably could list a number of other
And a
things,
green building.
big time.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And all the social experimentation that we're doing with how do you bring people together? How do you build a sense of community? How do you
Yeah.
deepen relationships? How do you solve conflicts?
Sociocracy versus modified consent and
Yeah.
all that
Yeah.
kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Which one?
Yeah.
Why?
Yeah.
And the last piece that I'm real excited about in your vision is right now you have three somewhat diverse,
Mhm.
because I think you share much more in common than you,
Oh,
yeah,
with the neighborhoods. Yes.
100%.
Yes. Yeah.
But their diversity and their proper scale also may leave some things on the table that a center that would
Mhm.
unify might actually create more opportunities for cross-pollination and for
Mhm.
exchange.
Mhm.
And so I'm all up on your vision. I think it would be a blast to work on that. And it would certainly be a big build, a
Yeah.
big build.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'll just tell you that right now we have a group of us that are working through these ideas. And it seems like in the village as a whole, there's more interest in something that's much smaller in scope,
Uh,
that might be more like a village center that is a very simple community center, and that might not even involve having to do any bathrooms or fire alarm systems or all the things you think about when you're building a building that add costs.
I see.
It might be something where we could use the existing common houses for kitchens to supply a meal
I
that could
see.
include more people. We're talking about the scale of maybe being able to hold gatherings of 150 people, because right now, even in our largest common house that was built to accommodate as many people as possible, it's truly difficult to have more than, I would say, 80 people at a time.
So you really can't gather the village.
We can't except outside,
Yeah.
and we would like to have a place we can do that. The only problem is there's a real tension between how much are we inward facing and how much are we outward facing.
Mm,
We're struggling with that a bit,
mm.
and so we're gonna be having more community conversations about this. The next one is in Oc maybe you'll be around for it.
Yeah. I love it. I love it. Thank you so much. This has been
Yeah.
amazing.